Welcome to Torchlight's Exceptional Parenting Podcast, where we talk with the nation's top experts about today's toughest parenting challenges. Whether you're concerned about your child's development, learning, behavior, or you just want to make family time more enjoyable, we share the practical solutions and tools that can help.
Hey everyone, welcome to this episode of Torchlight's Exceptional Parenting Podcast. I'm your host, Stephanie Boucher, and today is the season opener of our fourth season. So we're very excited. And if you are new to our show, welcome. We're happy to have you here. I encourage you to go back and check out our seasons 1 through 3. You won't regret it. And if you are a returning audience member, we are happy to have you back. I'm really excited about our show today. If you are a parent, and I think we can assume that if you're listening to this show, you likely are. There has probably been a time, or maybe a couple of times, or if you're honest with yourself, maybe many, many times, where you've lost your temper with your child or your children. Of course, it's very common. Parenting is the hardest job, and we're tired most of the time. We're busy. Our buttons get pushed, and we don't have training for this. This is not a job where we get prior training, and we usually don't know what else to do. We don't know what's going to work. So you might yell or you might shout, and maybe you've even screamed at your kids. And then you probably felt really bad afterwards because you know that it doesn't really work. You've seen that for yourself, and everyone's just kind of left feeling dejected and blah. Your kids, certainly, but also yourself. So we are going to cover that on the show today. And we have someone here who is an expert in this area. And she's going to tell us how to break this cycle and what to do instead of falling into that helpless temper tantrum trap. So who is this mystery guest? I am here today with Carla Naumburg, PhD. Carla is a writer, speaker, clinical social worker, and a mother. She is the author of 3 parenting books. The first, I believe, was called Parenting in the Present Moment, How to Stay Focused on What Really Matters. And that one was from 2014. The next was Ready, Set, Breathe, Practicing Mindfulness with Your Children for Fewer Meltdowns and a More Peaceful Family in 2015. And most recently, How to Stop Losing Your S with Your Kids. And I just had this conversation with Carla offline, titled Where the S is Supposed to Be is actually a much funnier, much more colorful word. I think you guys can probably all figure out what it is, but this is a fabulous book and we're going to talk about that. So she has appeared in the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Huffington Post, CNN, and Mindful Magazine, among other places. Carla, I'm so happy to have you here. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here.
Well, I recently had the pleasure of reading your latest book, How to Stop Losing Your S with Your Kids, and I loved it. It's such a practical answer to a pretty universal struggle that parents have. And it's really, really funny. So I kind of have to ask to start things out, are you always this funny, or do you just write in a comical way? Because you kind of strike me in the book as like that mom that all the other moms want to have at their parties because you just make us laugh the whole time.
Am I always this funny? I guess it really depends on who you ask. You asked me, so the answer is yes, I'm hilarious all the time. Of course, if you ask my 11 and 9-year-old daughters, I think they would probably have a different opinion, but they're kids, so what do they know? No, they don't like it. They don't think it's funny. Nothing. One day they will learn, and they will be grateful for how hilarious their mother is, but we're not there yet. This book is very much in my voice. This is the way I talk. This is the way I think. I must confess that I have a fairly juvenile sense of humor, and I do crack myself up a lot, which I have to say is a really helpful parenting skill that I don't think I realized how helpful it would be before I became a mother. But the ability to laugh at myself when I do insane, unhelpful things makes parenting a lot easier and more fun. So I got that going for me.
Humor is so important. And like I said before, this is the toughest job. And if you didn't have a sense of humor, I don't know where we'd all be because it's essential, I think.
Crying is where we'd be because that's where I have been.
We'd be crying all the time, and laughing is so much more fun. So I'm going to go with that. But, you know, one of the things I love about this book is its non-judgmental tone. You're very clear, I think, in pointing out the nearly universal nature of losing it. And in fact, even the New York Times, which I think you mentioned in your book, calls us a generation who yells. And I think we've kind of like traded in spanking for yelling in our generation. And you state that many people may do it more loudly or more publicly or even more harshly than others, but that anyone could be susceptible to a meltdown at any moment. We're only like one toddler tantrum away from like having our own meltdown at any time, I think, as parents. And you kind of just lay that all out on the table. And I think that's important because, you know, we want to solve the problem. We want to help people get to a better place with their parenting and in their families, and making people feel bad about themselves is not the way to do that. Shame has no place, really. So thank you for that.
Yeah, I'm so glad you picked up on that, because that was really important to me when writing this book, because I've just talked to so many friends, and I've had this experience of reading parenting books and feeling like, oh, someone else out there has totally figured this out and I haven't. And there's this laundry list of things I feel like I should be doing and I'm not, and I'm a terrible parent. And I did not want any parent to feel isolated, ashamed, or judged after reading my book. So I'm so glad you picked up on that.
I did. I picked up on it right away, and it made me happy. But what I also loved is that you're really forthright in saying that the ability to remain calm in frustrating moments is not about willpower. And this feels really important because I think most of us think that if we just decide not to lose our tempers anymore, then we can will that into being. And then when we don't, or we can't, or we fail, we feel awful and our self-esteem can just plummet even further. And this is maybe not really about willpower or about failing and falling off the wagon, so to speak. It's about gaining the tools that we need in order to do things differently. So we simply can't do it if we don't have the tools. And your book does a nice job of providing us with those tools.
Yeah, and this is a really important point. I knew one parent once who told me that she just decided to stop yelling at her kids, and then she stopped. And I'm pretty sure she's an android or an alien, not human. I don't know how that works. But look, I see it when we lose it with our kids. I really see that as a symptom of something else that's going on with us. And it can either be a symptom of some pretty significant stressors in our lives, which may or may not be related to our children and to parenting, or it can be a symptom of a challenging moment that we're having. But I see it really as a red flag going up saying, hey there, something's a little off. We got to work on this. We got to figure out why your buttons are so pushable that your kid is walking over and just able to push them so easily and quickly, and you're losing it. But I really don't think of it as a willpower issue. And I tend to think about sort of neurobiology and emotional responses and our fight or flight reaction and all these things I talk about in the book, that once we learn about them, we realize it's again, not about how strong we are. It's not about how much we love our kids. It's not about whether or not we're a good parent. It's really about the reaction we're having in the moment, which may or may not have anything to do with our child, but the child is there in front of us, so they're the ones who get the brunt of it.
Yeah, exactly. Early on in the book, you name the common characteristics of episodes where we lose it. And by we, I'm using the collective we, and we yell at our kids. Can we briefly talk about some of those characteristics? And please, let's also talk about the FART acronym. We have to talk about the FART acronym.
So, yes. Okay. So there are many different ways to lose it with our children, and it really looks different depending on your style. I mean, some of us scream and shout. Some of us use really sort of harsh terms or snarky voices. Some people slam doors, stomp out of the house, throw things. And in some cases, people are still hitting their children. So I didn't want to focus on a specific behavior, but instead I wanted to focus on the characteristics of a behavior that really make it about losing our temper with our kids. And let me give you an example of why this is important. Let's say, you're in the grocery store and your child's being obnoxious and you are just stressed out. It's been a long day. You've got a lot of work to get done when you get home. You got to get dinner on the table. You had a terrible conversation with your boss, and the kid is nagging you for candy and you just can't deal, and you lose it, and you grab your child really hard by the arm and yell at them and drag them out of the store. So that would probably qualify as losing it with your kids. I'm not saying you're not justified. I'm just saying you lost it. Now, let's say in the same situation, you're standing on a sidewalk and your child is about to dart into oncoming traffic, and you reach out and grab them by the arm and pull them back and perhaps yell, hey, don't do that. That's not safe. I'm not actually going to call that losing it with your kids, because I think in that case, you were having sort of a proportional reaction to what's going on in that moment. Like you were trying to keep them from getting hit by a car. So I think that's why it's important to sort of keep in mind that not every behavior is necessarily losing your temper, and losing your temper can look like a lot of different behaviors. But in the book, I outline what I think are sort of 4 characteristics of losing it. And yes, I did use the acronym FART, and I must explain that part of it was because that's actually the acronym that worked for the words I was trying to use. Yeah. And part of it is, as I say in the book, I want parents to remember that parenting is messy and it's uncomfortable and sometimes it's really stinky, and that it's like, this is stuff, both, farting and losing our temper with our kids is something that all of us try to hide from other people, and all of us do. Right. And so, again, and I just try to get a little silly in the book to make it feel more approachable and less judgmental. But let's get on to the characteristics. So the F is for feelings. Right? There are always some kind of feeling or emotion involved in losing our tempers, even if we don't realize it. So we may think it's all about these thoughts, like, my kid is being so annoying. If they don't stop this right now, I'm going to explode. Or maybe the thoughts are, I'm so mad at my spouse, or why did my friend say that weird thing to me, or what's going on with my in-laws, or how am I going to pay my rent, or all of these feelings, those thoughts can contribute to, us exploding. But there are also feelings underneath those, and those feelings are really what are driving this behavior. And they may be anger, rage, sadness, fear, anxiety, a sense of powerlessness, confusion. Parenting, as I'm sure every parent knows, can really bring out all the feelings, really big feelings in us. And one of the important aspects, and we can talk about this in a bit, to learning how to manage your temper is being able to identify when you are having a feeling. And so I just want parents to start thinking about, yes, I'm having all these thoughts, but what are the feelings underneath our thoughts? And feelings often live in our bodies. So you might notice it in a tightness of your stomach, a headache, tension in your shoulders, your heart rate sort of speeding up. Maybe you're not breathing as much. We often hold our breath without realizing it. So the F is for feelings. The A is for automatic, that often what happens is at some point our buttons are pushed so hard. And, well, first of all, when we're triggered up with these big feelings, our buttons get very big and bright and red and pushable. And as any parent who has ever been in an elevator with a child knows, what does a kid do when they see a button? They push it, right? So
they press all the buttons.
And they push them repeatedly. And kids know when we parents are ramped up. They have a spidey sense for us, right? They're totally focused on us. So they're going to come over and push these buttons because they want to see what happens, or they're also triggered and their buttons are big and they don't know what to do, or they want our attention, or they're tired, or there's a million reasons why kids push buttons. But what happens is at some point when our big, bright, sensitive, glowing buttons get pushed, we just lose it. And it becomes this very automatic reaction that it's not like we walk in the house and think, I had a terrible day today. I think I'll scream at my children. Most of us, that's not how it works. We're doing okay, or we're tense, or we're somewhere in between, and then something happens and we just lose it. And so this also goes back to the willpower issue. Once you have sort of crossed that threshold and your buttons have been pushed so many times, it is very, very hard and takes a ton of practice to just choose to not lose it. And it is something you can get better at. It's something I've gotten better at with practice. And I talk about how to do that in the book. But until you have those skills, it's really an automatic reaction. The R is for reactive, which means that I'm talking about the fact that when we lose our tempers with our children, we are reacting to something that has happened. And it is a reaction. You might say, well, yeah, I'm reacting to my kid. They're being obnoxious, which maybe true. But really what I want you to focus on is not your child's behavior, but what are the triggers happening in your life that are making your buttons so big and bright and red and pushable and making you so reactive? Are you in physical pain? Are you in emotional pain? Are you really stressed about everything on your to-do list, or a diagnosis that somebody in your family just got? or your financial situation, or your busted car, or, that weird comment that other mom on the playground made and you like don't know what it is, or an email you got from the principal that's really nagging at you. Like, how am I supposed to interpret this? Does my kid need testing? Like, there's a million things that may be going on, but something has set you off and triggered you, and you're reacting to that, and that reaction is coming out at your child. And you may say to me, hang on, Carla, hang on. Like, my kid triggers me all the time. Their obnoxious, unpredictable, confusing, annoying behavior is what's triggering me. So let's focus on that. And what I say in those cases is yes. And, I find it unproductive to hold our child responsible for our behavior. So if you're saying to me, the reason I'm losing it is because of my child's behavior, what I'm going to say to you is, are you prepared to wait another 8, 10, 12, 16, 20 years until your child starts behaving like a predictable human being before you get your temper under control? I don't want to do that. Kids.
That's a long time.
Even, all kids, they have tiny little brains. And the part of their brain that is responsible for using logic and making good choices and managing their emotions, it's literally doesn't exist yet. It is still growing. Their prefrontal cortexes. And,
until they're 25, by the way, 25. Yeah. So, that's really waiting a long time. You really cannot expect them to behave like an adult until that time.
Exactly. And even if you have the most mature child on the planet, even adults make terrible life choices, right? And so if your kid came home and said, the reason I hit this kid at school is because, he hit me, are you going to say, oh, well, if he hits you first, it's completely fine? Like, what? No. What do we say to our kids? We say, you can only control your own behavior. You can't control anyone else's. So that's how I feel about parents and losing our tempers with our kids. We can only control our own behavior. So we have to learn how to get ourselves to a place where we can stay calm, even when our kids are, have their little shenanigans. Now, the T is for toxic. So we've talked about feelings. We've talked about that this is an automatic behavior that's reactive. And the last one is toxic, because this is an important distinction, because as I said earlier, with the example of pulling your kid, out of the street, I think a child can come up with a pretty clear narrative about what happened. I almost ran into a car. So, daddy grabbed me, yanked me off the street and saved me from getting hit by a car. But when we have a toxic reaction to our children, our response is disproportionate to their behavior. It's scary and confusing. There might be sort of shame and blame involved, and it feels very out of control. It triggers us further. It triggers the children. And everybody's sort of confused about like, what just happened there and why did that happen? And because children are very egocentric by nature, they tend to sort of think that the world revolves around them. And this is a developmentally very appropriate thing. It doesn't mean your kid is a narcissist. It's just how the child mind works. What they tend to do is assume that it was their fault. Assume that they're the reason their parents lost it. And if they could just be a better child, maybe their parents wouldn't, freak out or scream at them. And that's a lot of burden to put on a young child, to say that your child is responsible for your behavior. And sometimes we lose it with our kids, even when they're not being that bad. And so how does the child understand it then? They understand it as, maybe I'm just a bad person. Now, to all the parents who are hearing this and freaking out, please don't flip out right now. In most cases, we parents yell at our kids. And when I say we, I include myself in this. This is, my journey too. And the kids are just fine, right? This is most kids know this is part of the parent-child dynamic. But if your temper gets really out of control and the majority of your interactions with your kids are exploding at them and your kids are frequently scared of you, that's a problem then, right? And so I don't want every parent, though, to assume that because they yell at their kids, sometimes they're damaging them permanently. That's not the case. But it is something to be aware of. So that's where FART comes from. Feelings, automatic, reactive, and toxic.
Well, it's a great acronym.
Thank you very much.
And it's very memorable, so we're not likely to forget that one. You talk a lot in the book about your own experiences around losing it with your kids and your anxiety that you have felt as a parent, and where your own frustration and anger came from. Spoiler, it's nearly always our own childhoods, I think, for a lot of us. Can you tell us briefly here about some of those struggles that you've had, and more importantly, how you finally got things on track after making many attempts to do so in the past? That didn't always work.
So I actually have a chapter about this in the book because it felt really, really important to me that readers could know and truly believe that they're not alone in these struggles. So my older daughter is almost 11. And after she was born, I developed a pretty whopping case of postpartum anxiety. And I was completely unaware of it for, I don't know, maybe the first 2 or 3 years after she was born.
Yeah.
And bear in mind, I had my second daughter just 20 months later. So the anxiety was pretty overwhelming for several years. And I'm a clinical social worker. I am the person who's supposed to be able to diagnose and treat these things. And yet I had never heard of postpartum anxiety at that time. And I certainly didn't understand that I had it. I thought it was just really normal and appropriate to constantly worry about everything related to your kids and to have thoughts that they might die every single day, which is what I was going through. And what happened with the anxiety is that very quickly, well, first of all, my sleep got screwed up because I had a newborn. And even after she started sleeping and she was a pretty good sleeper, I still wasn't sleeping because of my anxiety. And then the combination of anxiety and sleep deprivation led me to eat a lot, quite frankly. And what we know is that, many people deal with strong feelings by eating and other poor choice behaviors, but eating is one of them. And also we know that when people are chronically exhausted, they tend to eat more. And so then I was gaining weight, and then I developed sleep apnea, which is a really common sleep disorder, which made it even harder for me to sleep, but I didn't know it at the time, which made me be more anxious because exhaustion is a trigger for anxiety. So I'm sort of stuck in this vicious cycle of not sleeping, being anxious, eating, not sleeping more, which triggers the anxiety, which makes me not sleep. And what many people don't realize is that irritability is actually a pretty significant symptom of anxiety. And so this all came out at my daughters. Why did it come out at them? Because, well, gosh, they were the people I was with most of the time, right? I was with them pretty much constantly.
Right. Of course.
There was no sort of, other than me feeling deeply guilty and ashamed, there was really no negative there were no problems with me yelling at them, except, they felt awful, but they weren't going to yell back at me like my husband might. Or, if I was at work, a boss might fire me or discipline me or whatever, but my kids weren't doing that. And
they can't fire their mom.
Right. And their behavior was unpredictable and challenging, and I didn't have strategies for responding to it. But deep inside, okay, not just deep, really all over the place, I was filled with so much shame and guilt. I felt horrible about it. And so I remember one night in particular, I sat down at my computer, and bear in mind, I have a PhD in clinical social work, which is basically a PhD in like big feelings and confusing thoughts. So I am supposed to be the expert in this. I literally sat down. I put the girls in front of Daniel Tiger because I was like, better that they melt their brains in front of a screen than like keep getting yelled at by their mother. It was a really hard night. They were probably like 2 and 3 years old. And I sit down at the computer and I Google, how do I stop yelling at my kids? Like I was reduced to that because I was so overwhelmed and at a loss. And I got like millions of hits. It should have been reassuring to me that lots of other people are struggling with this.
Yeah, this is a very Googleable phrase.
But instead, what I thought in my anxious mind was, oh my God, everybody else knows how to fix this and I don't. But of course, if there was a solution to this that was quick and easy, like we wouldn't need 7 million websites. We would just know how to do it. So I tried a bunch of what I tend to think of as kind of willpower approaches, the if I coulda, I woulda approach. If I could have done 10 jumping jacks or taken all these deep breaths or, whispered instead of yelled or whatever it was, I would have done that. But for some reason, I can't do that. And the reason I couldn't do all those things is because I was exhausted and anxious. And there, my body was so flooded and overloaded at all times that I didn't have the willpower. I didn't have the presence of mind or the patience. And so really it wasn't until, my husband was like, I think you have a sleep disorder. And I was like, no, I don't, because who listens to their husband? And then eventually I finally decided to listen to him. And I went to a sleep clinic and I was diagnosed with sleep apnea. And then I got myself in therapy. and I started working on my anxiety. And between sort of tackling my sleep issues and my anxiety, things started to improve. And then I started learning some strategies for what to do instead. But this was like a year's process. Please, people, don't hear this and think that this happened in like a month. This was like 2 or 3 years of work. I started a mindfulness practice and took courses in mindfulness. And this was like a journey for me. And I've lost a bunch of the weight I gained. I don't really yell at my kids. I don't know. I would say we're down to maybe once a week, which I think is totally within the realm of normal. That's like, right. I feel pretty good about that. I absolutely still lose it with my kids, but it happens way less often. And it is now the exception rather than the rule in our relationship. And
right.
This is an ongoing process for me. So it's not like, oh, check that box, I'm done, moving on. Every day I have to get exercise. Every night I am in bed by 10 o'clock at the very latest, most nights 9:30. I have cut way back on my caffeine consumption. My sugar consumption is way down. I meditate. Like, it's like this ongoing process that I absolutely must stay on top of, or I fall apart pretty quickly and then I start losing it. And we've gotten to the point where my daughters will say, Mommy, you seem pretty cranky. Have you exercised today? Which of course makes me want to bite their little heads off, but they're right. So I have learned kind of what the basic requirements are for me to be able to parent the way I want to. And I've gotten pretty obsessive about staying on top of them.
Yeah. And they might be, a little bit different for each person. But I think the takeaway there is there's really going to be an element of self-care there for most parents. And, as parents and caregivers, we often feel guilty taking time to care for ourselves because there's just so much to do for everyone else that we, it seems like we're the only things that we can shove to the side. But if you can reframe that, if parents can reframe that into thinking that they can not truly be the best caregiver they can be unless they care for themselves, I think that's the point.
Absolutely. And I one of the things I try to do in the book is reframe these basic practices. They are self-care, 100%. But I think self-care has sort of become this phrase that's gotten a little wrapped up in this idea of like getting a pedicure or going out with like...
Yeah, it's not going to the spa necessarily.
And if that's what works for you, that's great. But I don't like people touching my feet. That doesn't really work for me. And again, a pedicure can feel very indulgent and it can be expensive. And it's, I get why for some parents, any self-care stuff that gets lumped in with that is like, not for me. And I really think of these as absolute requirements. And in the book, I refer to it as stuff you have to do if you don't want to lose your temper with your kids. I mean, I use the S word, but you get the point.
Yeah.
And it is not optional. And the way I encourage parents to think about it, if they're really struggling to integrate these basic practices like sleep, into their lives, is I say, A, what do you want to be modeling for your children? Do you want to teach them a lesson that they should absolutely put everyone else's needs ahead of their own and never pay attention to their own basic needs? And most parents immediately are like, no, of course I don't want that for my child. Okay, well, our children learn most powerfully by what they see us do. So let's model that for them. And the other is, let's be really honest. Is this way of living actually working for you? If you're not sleeping, if you're not exercising or moving your body somehow on a regular basis, if you're not getting downtime, if you're not doing these things that will help reduce your levels of stress and anxiety and temper tantrums, if you're not doing these things, is it working for you? And if it is, if you're like, yeah, actually, I feel pretty good. I feel like my relationship with my kids is solid. I feel like I'm about as patient as anyone could be. I feel comfortable with this, then great. Like, good for you. Put down my book and go live your life. But that's because not everyone struggles with parenting the way I did. And I know that. But my guess is if you picked up this book, something's not working for you. Right? So let's change that.
Yeah. So you talk about things, and you might have already just covered some of this, but there may be new elements in there. You talk about things that you must do and things that you should do in order to stop losing it. Can you share, a couple or a few of those things? I don't want to do spoilers for your whole book, so you can use your discretion. So
I've obviously mentioned sleep. That's a big one. But I call these burps because I love my bodily function acronyms, apparently. But burps I call button reduction practices because we're trying to get those buttons smaller, darker, harder for our kids to find so that when they come up ready to push, there's nothing there to push. And we're like, I'm good. You can do whatever you want. And I'm going to be here patient and kind and taking care of you because I took care of my buttons. They're not here for you to push, right? So that's awesome. So the requirements that I talk about are sleep, getting support. And I actually dive deep into the book about the different kinds of support that parents need and what that looks like and how to get it. Self-compassion is a huge one. And this was a game changer for me. And it's a game changer for many parents. Just cutting ourselves some slack, rather than going down this like shame spiral of feeling horrible and berating ourselves every time we lose it or have a, challenging parenting moment. What if we just talk to ourselves the way we talk to a really good friend? I mean, would you call up, if a friend called you and was like, oh, I blew it again. I screamed at the kids. I totally lost them. Would you say, oh, well, you're actually a terrible parent and you totally just screwed up your kids and you suck? Like, you wouldn't say that, right?
Oh, and we should be our own best friends. If we're not going to be, who else is? We should be our most loyal friend.
And really what you find is that when you have some compassion for yourself and say something like, you know what? Parenting is hard. It's hard for all of us. You can have a bad day or a bad moment and still be a good parent. We can always begin again and reconnect with our kids and apologize. And it's okay. And what do I need right now? Am I exhausted? Am I stressed? What am I worried about? Have I gone to the bathroom in the past 10 hours? Have I eaten all day? And sort of reminding ourselves of this big picture and just responding to ourselves with kindness not only feels a whole lot better, but actually makes it far less likely that we will lose it with our kids again. So it's a really powerful strategy. And then the last sort of requirement, the must do that I think most parents don't ever think about is what I call single tasking, by which I mean just doing one thing at a time. Look, multitasking is a huge trigger for most parents. And we don't realize this. Like most of us were raised in this culture where every single job description said ability to multitask required. And we think that if we can do more than one thing at a time, we're being like awesome and efficient and adulty and getting it all done. But the truth is, and researchers are really starting to understand this, that's not a thing. Like our brains can't do that. Our brains are incapable of doing more than one thing at a time. So they do something called task switching, where our brains are constantly jumping back and forth between various tasks. And there's actually a lag in there where our body has jumped to the next thing, but our brain can't quite keep up. And this increases our stress. And when I use the word stress, here's how I define it. I say that stress is the thought, belief, or perception that we cannot handle whatever is going on. And so when we have a million balls in the air, that's going to increase our perception on some level that we're going to drop one of those. And when we get more stressed, that's a huge trigger. So let me give you the classic example. It's after school. You're trying to make dinner. You've got like your cell phone lighting up with maybe texts or messages from your spouse or your mother-in-law or your boss. You got one kid over at the table who's like trying to do homework and asking you how to spell stuff. You got the pot of boiling water on the stove because everybody cooks pasta because that's all our kids eat these days. And then you've got one kid in the bathroom yelling for you to come wipe her, right? And so you're trying to manage all of these things, this dinner, these text messages, child with the homework, child in the bathroom. And the next time this or something similar happens to one of my listeners, I encourage you guys, notice how long it takes you to freak out.
I'm getting stressed just listening to your description.
And yet, haven't you been in that situation?
All the time.
So
all the time.
What do we do instead? Yeah. We decide that multitasking is actually not awesome, that it's a good choice under very specific circumstances. None of those circumstances involve our children. Trying to multitask when our kids are around is a recipe for a meltdown by the child or the parent or both. So I am starting to train my kids. So if I'm making dinner, I will say that, and they come to the question, I'll say, you know what? I'm making dinner right now. So hold that question and I will help you in a few minutes when dinner's over. And look, they're 9 and 11 right now. So they're pretty good at this. But if you have a 2-year-old, this is why help and support is so helpful. This is why, having an opportunity to make dinner ahead of time is so helpful. This is why having a whole lot of compassion for yourself for how hard parenting is so important, because we can't do it perfectly and we can't do it right all the time. But can you put your phone away? Can you put it in the other room for just a few minutes? And one of the things I learned to do is I actually got myself a wrist device, a smartwatch that I wear when the girls are in school. So I won't miss a call from their school, but I don't have to be staring at my phone all the time. And that helps me focus on just one thing. Right. So I go through a whole lot of steps in the book about how parents can get better at single tasking, because I promise you that multitasking is one of the most powerful triggers that leads us to lose it with our children.
I am such a proponent of single tasking. I mean, I feel like I've been saying this to people for years in my life, that multitasking is way overrated. I think it's at the root of a lot of our stress and our issues and our lack of focus and all sorts of things that are just, we take for granted as a part of modern life now. But I think it can be really unhealthy. And so I know for me, I've been working for a while to bring a lot of mindfulness into my life, and to try to just be present in the moment, focus on whatever I'm doing in that moment, and then not feeling guilty that I'm only doing one thing in that moment, or for many moments in a row, or for an hour, or whatever. Like, I don't feel guilty about that anymore, because I know that for me, I'm in a better mental space and I feel better physically, and I'm far more productive if I just allow myself to do 100%. One thing.
And look,
and that's it.
You as a parent get to choose what that one thing is, right? And we can't do everything. Let me give you an example.
Yeah.
I don't like cooking. I'm not a particularly good cook. My husband's a fabulous cook. So when he's home, he cooks. And when I'm home, the girls get really basic, simple meals. And we do a lot of repeating of meals, because that's not how I want to spend my time when I'm with them. And that's a choice I made, right? But if you are a person who takes great joy in cooking, and it's really important to you to share a variety of flavors and tastes and meals with your kids, then that is such a good choice for you to make. But if you're thinking, how am I going to be this perfect parent who always has a beautiful multi-course hot cooked meal on the table and is spending time with my children and is managing this career and I have no support and this, like, it's not going to work. So, and it's not going to work even if you multitask. That's not going to make it work any better. You're just more likely to break something or drop something or lose, forget, cut yourself, scream at your kids, whatever. Yeah. But something has to give. And the other thing I want to remind parents is, whatever stage you're in right now with your parenting and your children, it is a stage. It's going to get better and it'll get worse, but then that part will get better too. So it's not going to be like this forever. So if you're like, you know what, I've got a 1.5-year-old and I just can't cook meals for us the way I used to, well, that's true for now, but it may not be true forever. So hang in there, because this too shall pass.
Yeah, things change all the time with kids. Like every year, it's like having a new set of children, I think. So it will change. So what should parents do in the heat of the moment when they feel a storm coming inside of themselves? They realize they're in danger of losing it, and they don't want to.
Yes.
What are your tips?
And you actually touched on the first and most important step, is you said they realize they're in danger of losing it. And what I would say is that most parents, most humans, skip right over that step. We don't even realize. So we either go from sometimes we ramp up over time and then lose it. And sometimes we can go from 0 to 60 almost instantaneously. But for most of us, we skip right over that moment of awareness. And you talked about your mindfulness practice. Well, this is a mindfulness practice. And the way I try to describe it is, it's the difference between being the lead actor in this horrible play versus saying, whoa, like, hang on, this is actually a terrible scene. I don't want to be in this one. And taking a moment to step into the audience. And when we're in the audience, maybe then we can start directing the show in a different way. So it really is this mindset of, are we completely wrapped up and lost in this moment, being swept away by our emotions? Or is there some part of our brain that can step in and kind of notice, whoa, this is happening? So if you can notice that that's happening, first of all, congratulate yourself, because that's a huge feat. It's a hard thing to do, because when our emotions are on high alert, when our emotions are flowing, the part of our brain that does the noticing is actually offline. And so to have that part of the brain come online is a big deal. And it's a practice we can get better at. We can practice noticing. And that just means sort of taking a step back and having that perspective, right? That, okay, I'm watching the show and I'm seeing what's happening. So I give a lot of strategies in the book for how to literally practice noticing. It's easier to practice when you're not stressed and overwhelmed and about to lose it. And the more you practice it in easy, calm moments, the more likely you will be to notice, to pay attention, to become aware, to realize in those difficult emotional moments. So step 1 is to notice.
Right.
Step 2 is the instant you notice, just pause. Pause everything. Just give yourself a moment. And no matter what's happening, you can pause. Even if you are mid-scream, and I have done this before, and it's incredibly shocking to everyone, and it really disrupts the moment.
I'm sure it sounds
But
funny.
when you are shouting at your kids, and then all of a sudden you shut your mouth, or you start clucking like a chicken, or you sing some ridiculous song, which I have absolutely done all of those things, it like injects this moment of kind of happy confusion, where everyone's like, whoa, what happened? Like, oh, and all of a sudden everything kind of lightens up and you do whatever you have to do to pause. And sometimes the pause is quiet and sometimes it's not. Sometimes for me, it can look really like clucking like a chicken or barking or making a weird like gobbledygook sound. Just kind of stop what's going on. Pause it for a moment. And the reason I use the word pause and not stop is I think a pause feels kind of gentler and easier and a stop feels like, wait, but what? I'm stuck now with this stop. So, and the point of the pause is not to like sit there and make your plan and strategize and or like think about what a jerk your kid is being or ruminate on what an awful parent you are, because all of that is just going to keep you triggered and more likely to jump right back into the fray. So the point of the pause is just to like chill for a sec, calm things down a little bit. And then the next step is to what I call, this is very clinical, sophisticated language, so I hope your listeners don't get confused. It's literally do anything else, right? Anything. I guess not anything, because I don't want you to go scream at your kids or hit them or do something that's going to ramp you up again. But you have all of this energy inside you. Your body has gone into what I call fight, flight, freeze, or freak out mode. And so that energy isn't just going to dissipate. So you need to figure out what strategy works for you to calm your system down. And for some people, it is like counting to 10 or breathing 10 deep breaths or singing a song or reciting a prayer or a mantra. For some people, it's very physical. Like, do you need to run up and down the stairs in your house? Do you need to jump up and down? Do you need to go outside and get some fresh air? Do you need to sing a really loud song because you know this has to come out of your mouth and you don't want it to be screaming? I have a friend who has this really lovely picture of her children and she taped it on the inside of her kitchen cabinet. And she specifically, so what she said, when I feel like strangling my kids, I go look at this picture and it calms me down. So what do you need to do? And look, you may say, hey, Carla, I thought you said at the beginning of this conversation that these are those coulda, woulda strategies. If I could have done them, I would have done them. And that's true. So if you try to do these strategies completely out of the blue with no other practice, no other self-care techniques, no other support, no other self-compassion, they're probably not going to work. Because the analogy I use is it's like sending your kid out onto the soccer field for the championship game of the whole season and telling them they have to score the winning goal. That is a setup for failure. Your child will never do that, especially if they've never practiced, right? Yeah. So if you're going to say to yourself, all of a sudden, I am going to, notice, pause, and do anything else in this incredibly stressed moment when I am flooded by emotions and I haven't been taking care of myself, I haven't been practicing, I haven't done all these other things, it's unlikely to work. But in the book, I go through all of the self-care, all of the practices, all of the strategies. So when you get to that moment, you will be far more likely to catch yourself and interrupt the moment. And you will not be perfect at it. I still lose my temper with my kids at least once a week, but it's so much better. And for me, that's in the realm of normal. That's in the realm of typical. That's in the realm of reasonable. And we still have a strong relationship. So the strategy is notice, pause, and do anything else. And there's a whole lot of information in the book about how to get better at doing that.
That's great. Well, Carla, thank you so much for being on the show today. It's been such a pleasure and an honor to get your perspective. I highly recommend to our listeners that you go out and get yourself a copy of Carla's book.
So the book will hit shelves on August 20th, 2019, and people are welcome to pre-order it at any time. It's available on all major online retailers and booksellers, and it'll be on actual shelves on August 20th.
All right. Well, in the meantime, if you can't get yourself a copy of the book right away and you'd like to learn more about how to keep your cool as a parent, you can also explore the e-guide called Calm Parenting, How to Stop Yelling at Your Kids. Also check out a previous episode of this podcast way back from season 1 called Why Aren't You Listening to Me? Communicating and Connecting with Your Child. That brings us to the end of our show. Thank you so much for spending part of your day with us, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to Torchlight's Exceptional Parenting Podcast. Find this and other episodes on iTunes, Spreaker, and Podcast Go. If you're interested in bringing Torchlight Child or any of Torchlight's other caregiving products to your workplace, please contact info@torchlight.care. That's info@torchlight.care.